Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder with something pretty special for the channel today. I feel quite lucky as a content creator to be able to share the work of a channel that I see as up and coming. Today, we'll be doing a collaboration with Installation00, a Halo lore channel known for their exceptionally detailed videos. I'm talking half an hour and more on a single topic. Trust me when I say, guys, the amount of dedication that this takes, especially as a still fairly new channel, is incredible. So I'm asking you guys to do me a favor. If you enjoy Halo lore, sci-fi, or just this video, consider checking out, subscribing, and supporting Installation00. As a bit of a reward, you know that Valiant Super Heavy Cruiser video you guys have been asking for a while? Well, it's available today over on his channel. Link to that down in the description.
Hey guys, welcome back to Installation00, and our next installment of the most detailed series. This video is done as a collaboration between myself and EckhartsLadder, who covers Halo and Star Wars lore and frequently looks at starships from both universes. And I've been a long time watcher and subscribed to his awesome content, so if you're not already, head over to his channel and show him some love. I'll put a link to both my channel and his channel in the description, and it is my understanding that Eckhart himself is doing a breakdown of the Valiant Class Super Heavy Cruiser, which is also linked in the video description. It's an honor to work with you, man. In this video, we are giving one of the most recognizable ships in the Halo universe the most detailed treatment. A modified and modernized version of the Halcyon Class Cruiser, and a ship that saw significant action in the Human Covenant War, as well as discovering one of the most mysterious and awe-inspiring artificial constructs in the galaxy, and performing so well under the command of Captain Jacob Keyes, and under extreme pressures well outside of its intended operational capabilities, that it was given the honour of having an entire class of modern human vessels modelled after her in the form of the Autumn Class Heavy Cruisers. Oh yeah, today we're giving the Pillar of Autumn the most detailed treatment. Now, as this is a ship and altogether a very different object to analyse than the armours that we've analysed in the past, we are changing our outside-in modus operandi and instead opting to look at her overall exterior, hull and superstructure, and then analyse her from stem to stern, looking at each of the 5 major hull sections. Let's get started. UNSC Pillar of Autumn, hull classification C-709, was a Halcyon class light cruiser in the UNSC Navy. She was informally referred to as the Autumn. She was constructed at the Rees-McLeay shipyards on Mars. The ship began construction in 2507, was completed in 2509, and was launched on December 1st, 2510. At 1,171 metres in length, 352 metres in width and 398 metres in height, and with a mass of 9 million metric tons, she, along with the entire Halcyon range, was the smallest and lightest ship to ever be given the designation of cruiser. With the exception of known engagements at Arcadia Colony, the Autumn's service record pre-2550 is almost entirely unknown. What is known is that it was decommissioned with the rest of the remaining Halcyon-class light cruisers, but was reactivated as the war worsened. The Pillar of Autumn was pulled from long-term storage and was refitted in 2550 to serve as an emergency support ship in a conflict near Zeta Doridus. Prior to the fall of Reach, the Pillar of Autumn was selected to support Operation Red Flag, a Spartan II mission to capture Covenant leaders. Captain Jacob Keyes was placed in command. The operation was forestalled by the Covenant assault on Reach. The cruiser carried some of the few UNSC survivors and fled the system, having lost most of its intended Spartan II passengers. The cruiser was guided to the Soel system by smart AI Cortana. There it was engaged by Covenant fleet guarding Installation04. Keyes crash-landed the ship on the installation, where the surviving crew continued the battle against the Covenant and later, the Flood. The ship's sole remaining combat-effective Spartan II, John 117, was forced to destabilise the Autumn's fusion reactor, destroying both the ship and the ring world to prevent the installation from being fired. So let's get a closer look at this legendary ship. The Pillar of Autumn's hull is made of 2 meters of titanium A battle plate armour. It is known that this particular permutation of titanium is titanium-50, a stable isotope of titanium, with 22 protons and 28 neutrons, totaling 50 subatomic particles. This is then alloyed with 4% aluminium, 2.5% vanadium and 1.5% iron, which reduces the amount of vanadium needed as a beta stabilizer. This is known as grade 38, which has good cold workability and higher atomic density, leading to superior ductility, which enables the plating to locally deform when struck by high velocity projectiles rather than cracking completely. The entire alloy is then molecularly strengthened to attain a condition known as single crystal superalloy. In most alloys, the microcrystalline structure tends to be arranged as islands of ordered atomic matrices all meshed together into a disordered phase matrix. This results in a grain boundary between the different orientations of ordered metal crystals within the alloy, and these boundaries result in areas of weakness in the material that high heat and stress can exploit and result in critical degradation of the plate's structural integrity. A single crystal superalloy has all of the atomic structures of the material in an ordered phase and orientation, equating to a single crystal throughout the entire material. This means that there are no grain boundaries, and thus no weaknesses to be exploited. The 2 meters of titanium A is employed alongside thick layers of elastic polymers and intermetallic laminates, allowing the ship's hull to mitigate both kinetic and energy-based attacks within reason. The space between the armor plates is filled with a shear thickening fluid, which are a non-Newtonian fluid containing suspended particles of ceramic. When a shear force is exerted against the fluid, the particles within the fluid form an almost instantaneous crystalline matrix, hardening the fluid to 98% the mechanical strength of the associated ceramic material in the blink of an eye, thereby acting as a form of liquid armor, the induced crystalline matrix relaxing and returning to its normal viscosity nearly immediately afterward. This fluid also has an encapsulated healing agent to reduce spall from impacts and automatically seal small hull breaches. The plates are also generally embedded with thermal superconducting radiators to more efficiently transfer the heat generated by the ship into space. Unfortunately, this function doesn't benefit the ship at all in reverse. When the plating is struck by sufficiently large plasma weaponry, the plates heat up, and in particularly sustained attacks can become molten and boil away. The radiators don't help in dissipating the heat taken on board by plasma bombardment, and generally the plates radiate this heat back into space gradually, unfortunately because air can conduct heat significantly better than a vacuum. This is also accompanied by the internal air temperature spiking considerably in areas close to the impact zones, in some cases becoming hot enough to burn flesh. Since the Autumn was active well before the UNSC mastered energy shielding, the Autumn had to rely upon her armour and superior superstructure to survive hostile engagements. The superstructure of the Autumn, as with the entire Halcyon range, was predominantly built around its primary armament, the Mac gun, which ran 2/3 of its entire length. The superstructure was assembled around this weapon and then branched off onto the inner surfaces of the hull via its most noteworthy design feature. A series of internal cross-bracings and honeycombs reinforced by hydraulic rams and solid titanium A struts was the hidden defensive weapon of the Autumn. Designed by Dr. Robert McLeese, this internal superstructure made the ships surprisingly resistant to battle damage. Ships of the class were able to remain operational despite sustaining breaches to all compartments and losing 90% of their armour. In theory, as long as the bridge was secure and the engines were firing, the ship could remain operational with basically everything else aside from its superstructure completely destroyed. In many of the ship's internal corridors, large bracings can be seen from the major superstructures, and many of the primary connective corridors feature hydraulic rams designed to maintain their structural integrity in case of just such an incident. Sealable bulkhead airlocks and blast doors were positioned throughout the ship to enable areas to be isolated should they be breached to the vacuum of space, and were of particular use during the boarding action from the Covenant. These doors could be locked down and then the atmosphere vented in those compartments, asphyxiating any hostiles in those areas, unless they were wearing their own breathing apparatus. These doors were large and mechanically operated, and made of titanium frames, crystalline silica carbide glass, and hermetic seals. These doors alone allowed sections to be sealed from breach, but in addition to these, solid titanium A blast doors could be activated and brought into place that kept unbreached areas of the ship separated from any further damage that the breached sections may endure, including hostile weapon fire or an attempt to escape the contained areas, fires, further damage from ship-to-ship weapons, shrapnel, and high-velocity debris. With such considerable interconnecting support structures, the primary corridors, rooms, chambers, and functional areas have to be fitted into the areas between these heavy supports. In some cases, these supports still cannot be avoided and may traverse a primary corridor directly, limiting the use of available space. This presents a particular problem given that many of the ship's functional components, data centers, networking, communications, and server equipment have to be positioned at key areas of the ship overall to remain logistically central to the ship's primary operating functions. This often means that such areas have to be positioned in what would otherwise be nearly inaccessible areas of the ship. In case of general maintenance or emergency repair, and to avoid having to cut through deck plates or bulkheads in order to access them, a matrix of maintenance accessways and service corridors run the length and breadth of the Autumn. These are much tighter than the substantially more spacious primary corridors, measuring 2.25 meters in height and 1.25 meters in width. These accessways grant maintenance and ops personnel access to nearly any point of the ship they require. In addition to this, she was fitted with an intra-ship transit system which consisted of a network of lifts, stairs, and mag-rail platforms. This allowed personnel to quickly travel through the ship. The Autumn had been upgraded from the Halcyon range to have an impressive armament when compared to the original ships of the line. After her upgrades, she had 300 M58 Archer missile pods, which were arranged in 30 columns of 10 rows, each pod containing 26 individual devices, equaling 7,800 missiles. She had 4 Shiva nuclear warheads, 40 M910 50mm point defense guns with overlapping fields of fire for point defense against single ships, 8 Mark 33 Spitfire naval coil gun batteries firing 13-inch slugs at 10,000 meters per second, and 6 M66 Sentry autocannon turrets. The ship was also equipped with 3 Havoc warheads rated at 30 megatons, or the equivalent of 2,000 Hiroshima bombs. The primary armament of the Pillar of Autumn was its single Mark II light coil 56A2 D4 MAC gun that ran 2/3 of the length of the cruiser and fired a trio of light projectiles with a single charge of the firing capacitor, sending 3 of the 300-ton projectiles downrange at 12,000 kilometers per second. But we will look at this in a future installment of the Armory that is on its way. Additionally, the Autumn carried an impressive complement of crew, vehicles and fighting units, including 5 GA-TL-1 longsword fighters, 12 D-77 TC Pelican dropships, 2 D-96 TCE Albatross heavy lift dropships, an unknown number of UH-144 Falcons, 20 M808B Scorpion main battle tanks, 60 M12 Warthogs, at least 9 M145D Rhinos that were dispatched to assist UNSC Spirit of Fire on Arcadia Colony, at least 18 Class 3 Bumblebee heavy lifeboat escape units, 216 M8823 Soeve drop pods, 1,000 naval personnel, 800 Marines, 400 ODSTs, the 79th Infantry Battalion numbering some 1,000 infantry units, an unknown quantity of army personnel likely extracted from Reach upon its glassing, and 2 known Spartan II commandos, 1 Petty Officer 2nd Class Linda 058 in cryogenic suspension due to life-threatening injury, who was clinically dead upon arrival but was later revived, and the other being Master Chief Petty Officer Spartan 117, who played an integral role in the Autumn's closing days and moments. The forward hull section, as with many of the others, is of a hexagonal profile, its most prominent feature being the muzzle of the Mac cannon. Due to this weapon's immense power and the inherent electromagnetism, it requires a substantial amount of electromagnetic shielding, taking up a large portion of available space in the relatively small bow section. Underslung to this section is an array of communications antennae, with slip-space navigation sensors and hardened battlenet transponders, and 1 of the M66 Sentry autocannon turrets, as well as a couple of the M910 50mm point defense guns. Some Archer missile pods are also located on this hull section, so likely, due to its size, the vast majority of remaining space after the MAC will be taken up with gun turrets and ammunition stores for the point defence weapons in this area, as well as large data processing centres for the STEM-positioned communications antennae. On the sides of this section are two low-profile rotating engine pods, holding 6 fusion rocket thrusters, 3 on each side. While small, they generate an impressive amount of thrust, and can vector their thrust in any direction independent of each other. This allows the Autumn to adjust her pitch, yaw and roll, helped in tandem with various reaction control system thrusters positioned across the hull, allowing the Autumn to adjust her heading in zero gravity without the inherent drift that would be typical for a craft powered exclusively by one set of thrusters pointing in one single direction. The primary airlocks are located and noticeable on the outer hull surface on Hul Section 2. These large circular protrusions are structural hardpoints with cycle-through airlock blast doors. These can be affixed to space stations, orbital defence platforms, maintenance gimbals, as well as other ships. Due to the narrow position in respect of the aft hull sections, if the object the ship is docking to is large enough for this to be an issue, an umbilical is extended between the ship and whatever it is docking to, thereby bridging the gap. The hull is again punctuated by Archer missile pods and point defence guns, and a planetary scanning array is mounted just below its Omega Pattern bridge, which is outfitted with planetary survey sensors and probe and satellite launchers. The bridge has a large viewport at the front of the room which looks out into space. This was evidently meant to be armoured before the Autumn's mission, but there hadn't been time. The navigation and helm control officers were suspended in this viewport via mechanically extending chairs. These officers are responsible for steering the ship at sublight speeds and executing slipspace transitions. There were 6 consoles which lined the sides of the room, and 2 in the centre. The Pillar of Autumn had 3 tactical stations located in various positions. These consoles are responsible for controlling and maintaining the ship's weapon systems. Autocannons, Archer missile pods, the magnetic accelerator cannon and Shiva nukes are launched and controlled by the 2 tactical officers. There were 2 consoles in the Autumn's bridge marked Eng. They are likely the equivalent of operations consoles. The ship's nuclear fusion reactors and other engineering functions are maintained here. The final consoles being for communications. The captain or commander of the ship stands before a large tactical map which can provide a series of important pieces of information. The holotank for the ship's AI was also located near the captain's station. At the time of its arrival in the Soel system, the Autumn's bridge was manned by 14 officers. The captain's quarters are located near the bridge through a coded accessway, but the access to this area is permitted exclusively to the captain, so as such, very little detail is known about the interior design. Armory 1 is located approximately 15 metres aft and 20 metres starboard to the bridge, and is outfitted with an array of UNSC standard issue weapons and ammunition. Its central location is likely due to the relatively close proximity to the mess hall and thus the ability for troops there to quickly arm themselves in the event of boarding action. Mess Hall 1 is located approximately 20 metres aft of the bridge. This is considered likely as being for E7 through E9 pay grade officers, due to its proximity to the bridge and other essential operational areas. This mess hall appears to be served by vending machines that offer food and drink, although it is likely it is also served by a conventional galley. Cryobays A and B are located further aft of the mess hall and are again considered the cryobays for officers of pay grade E7 and above. This is assumed due to the low number of cryopod stations available in these cryobays, and the fact that Spartan 117, being the rank of Master Chief Petty Officer, was also awoken in one of these bays. The remaining area of Hul Section 2, taking up most of the space above the decks the aforementioned areas occupy, is the ammunition stores for all the weapons and point defence in Hul Section 2, which are rather considerable given their size. These ammo stores include fast travel lines, heavy lift gear and overhead crane arms to help move the ammunition quickly and effectively to wherever it is needed. The outer hull of Section 3 has more Archer missile pods and point defence guns, but its most dominating feature are the 4 Shiva nuclear warhead launch bays, 2 on each side of the ship. partially concealed under their own cowling. The predominant purpose of this hull section is for the cargo stores. The lowest set section of the hull contains several external airlocks, a holding area and warehouse, and a sloping goods lift that ferries cargo and supplies up into the larger cargo areas in the body of the hull. Emergency thrusters are standard equipment on UNSC vessels. They are often the reason a UNSC ship is able to escape a confrontation unscathed. These thrusters are used only in dire situations, for instance, to dodge enemy fire where the standard propulsion systems would not be able to do so. They consist of strategically placed tanks on the ship's outer hull containing trihydride tetrazine and hydrogen peroxide. These substances, when mixed, produce significant explosive force to blast the ship onto a new course. However, the thruster is expended in the process and must be replaced in a ship dock before it can be used again. The Pillar of Autumn has several of these emergency thrusters positioned across Hull Section 3 and 4. Hull Section 4's surface is yet again adorned with Archer missile pods and point defence guns, as well as communications arrays, 5 of the 6 Sentry autocannon turrets, all 8 of the Mark 33 Spitfire naval coil gun batteries, 8 loading bays, 4 on the port and 4 on the starboard, and the MAC fire control centre, where the MAC rounds are loaded into the barrel and the massive capacitors are charged to then discharge into the coils, causing the rounds to accelerate down the barrel, reaching 12,000 km per second. This area is fed power directly from the fusion reactors via high impedance power conduits. Given that the ship holds a total naval crew complement of at least 1,000, crew quarters will have to have been squeezed into any possible space. The vast majority of living quarters can be found in Hull Section 4, outfitted with hundreds of cabins, 4 bunks a cabin, 8 people per cabin, generally for the naval personnel working and living in rotational shift patterns to each other. Single recreational and social areas generally served between 8 and 12 cabins in a block, with likely dozens of blocks. The vast majority of the rest of the living quarters in this section will be for the nearly 2,000 Marines and Army, and as such will be laid out in a barracks type format, with large numbers of soldiers all living, sleeping and washing communally, with some provisions made for officer ranks. There are 2 large armories in the central area of Hull Section 4, and one towards the rear of this section just outside of engineering. Armory 2 and 3 are significantly larger than 1 and 4, due to their need to supply nearly 2,000 troops with their weapons and ammo. There are large cryobays in this section, much larger than the cryobay towards the front of the ship, and arranged linearly along the stem of the ship. These multi-tiered cryobays housed all of the cryopods needed to put the entire onboard personnel into cryosleep during particularly long journeys. A large infirmary is located close to these cryobays, first as a means to get medical personnel quickly to any issues coming out of cryo, and second as a combat hospital, as the infirmary is relatively well accessed by the 8 launching bays. Lower down Hull Section 4 are the lifepod hatches, each hatch holding 1 Class 3 Bumblebee heavy lifeboat escape unit, each designed to ferry up to 9 people at a time. It has 1 pilot seat as well as 8 side-facing crash seats. The seats have harnesses to keep people from injury when crash landing, though they are noted as being one of the safer methods of UNSC ship evacuation. The effectiveness of the safety features on the Bumblebee vary greatly, as can their reliability. When activated, the airlock doors are blasted off by explosive bolts, and the Bumblebee is sucked out into space by vacuum pressure, only igniting their engines after clearing the hull of the ship. The drop bay is a room specifically, though not exclusively, used by the ODSTs, otherwise known as Hell Jumpers. The room holds 216 M8823 single-occupant exo-atmospheric insertion vehicles, or SOEV drop pods. The pod's operator enters the pod and straps in facing the hatch. The SOEVs are located in a long narrow compartment near the belly of the Autumn, colloquially referred to as Hell's Waiting Room. The room is typically lined with 2 rows of drop pods. Each SOEV is poised over a tube that extends downward through the spacecraft's belly. The preparation chambers are often stacked on multiple decks to allow several pods to be deployed via the same tube in rapid succession. To initiate deployment, a pod's operator must run an obligatory systems check, remove a series of safeties and arm their ejection tube. Generally, the ship's fire control computer is responsible for ejecting the SOEVs at a trajectory that allows it to drop into a correct entry path. A 30-second deployment countdown begins on the mark of the commanding officer of the unit. Afterwards, the SOEVs quickly fire through the tube that runs down the ship's belly. The drop pods are typically deployed from either a high altitude or from an exo-atmospheric location. They are either fired out of the spacecraft or soft ejected towards the world's surface until the pod breaches the atmosphere. This atmospheric insertion generates intense heat, hence the nickname of the drop bay being Hell's Waiting Room, and the troopers being Hell Jumpers. Pelican Bay 1 and 2 are located near the belly of the Autumn, where the Hul Section 4 joins Hul Section 5. These Pelican Bays allow the Pelican dropships easy access in and out of the ship. Once inside the bays, the Pelicans can be cycled quickly through an airlock system and ferried on internal mag rail platforms back to their holding bays, where they can then be maintained, restocked, reloaded, and sent back through to the launch bays in one single continuous process. This allows Pelicans to turn around quickly and get back out onto deployment within a very short space of time. Pillar of Autumn's engine room was a large 3-decked high chamber, allowing access to the fusion cores, which used an experimental architecture where a single main reactor was nested within 2 smaller reactor rings. When activated, the secondary reactors supercharged the main reactor, and their overlapping magnetic fields could temporarily boost the reactor output by 300%. The 6 exhaust manifolds were suspended above the second deck and could be retracted if needed. Vent covers would be kept closed to keep the core isolated from the chamber itself. These could be overwritten but needed special clearance in order to do so, which was performed by Cortana by the use of Captain Key's neural transponder authorization, so that Master Chief could sufficiently damage the core to prompt core meltdown and detonation. Opening these vents exposed the entire engine room to the heat and radiation of the core of the reactor. Their primary purpose was to allow reactor plasma to flow from the reactor cores to the 12 smaller secondary thrusters. In normal operation, the vast majority of the plasma medium was directed to the high-order manifolds to the primary thrusters. The Autumn's FTL drive is the SED-2550X Series 5 Koden Shore Fujikawa translate engine. The Shore Fujikawa translate engine functions by creating ruptures referred to in some sources as wormholes between normal space and the alternate plane known as slip space, also known as slipstream space or Shore Fujikawa space. The engine creates ruptures by using high-power cyclic particle accelerators to generate microscopic black holes. Because of their low mass, Hawking radiation gives them a lifetime of around a nanosecond, or potentially a little longer than a whole second, before they evaporate into useless thermal energy. In that nanosecond, the engine manipulates them into forming a coherent rupture between normal space and slipstream space. A major component of the drive is a set of slip space capacitors, which have to be charged before a jump, drawing power from the ship's main reactors. The Shore Fujikawa translate engine generates a quantum field which prevents the ship and its occupants from being directly exposed to the 11-dimensional space-time of slipspace, instead translating the ship's presence to the foreign physics of slipstream space and squeezing it through the higher dimensions. Maintaining the quantum field requires an enormous amount of calculations, with larger vessels requiring significantly more than smaller ones. For example, the slipspace translations for a Phoenix-class colony ship require 4.3 quadrillion calculations of the quantum field per second. The slipspace drive does not actually accelerate a spacecraft through slipstream space. This is performed by the ship's conventional reaction engines. Thus, ships with more powerful conventional engines are also faster within slipstream space. When active, the Shore Fujikawa translate engine emits alpha and beta particles. The coordination and plotting of slipspace jumps, referred to as astrogation, requires an enormous amount of calculations which require a navigational computer or an AI to successfully conduct, although they can be calculated by a human. For full details on the particulars of FTL travel and engines, see my 2 videos titled Slipspace and Slipspace Engines. Links are in the description. Prior to being refit for the Spartan mission, Pillar of Autumn was equipped with 3 Mark II Hanley Messier deuterium fusion engines, which supplied only 10% of the power of the standard 2552 UNSC Navy reactors. Pillar of Autumn was refitted with a set of improved nuclear fusion engines that featured 2 smaller reactors around a larger one, which were capable of boosting the overall output power by 300% for a short time if needed. Fusion reactors generate extreme heat which must be removed in order for them to remain active without overheating. The Autumn's overhauled reactors were an especially severe case of this. Usually the excess heat was conducted to a chemical agent which would then be vented into space. However, the Autumn's upgraded specifications also included an upgraded cooling system which featured a laser-induced optical slurry of ions chilled to near absolute zero. This was far more efficient than the typical method and removed the reliance on expendable chemical temperature control substances. In essence, the amount of excess heat removed by the new system increased as the reactor's output did. This self-regulating and self-cooling power plant was critical in combat since it virtually eliminated the commander's concerns about overheating and slagging the ship's engines. Nuclear fusion is one of the most significant breakthroughs in energy generation technology, taking 2 atoms of deuterium, isotopes of hydrogen, and fusing them together under high pressures via very powerful electromagnetic fields. The result is a helium-3 nucleus and the release of huge amounts of energy. Some of this energy is converted by a process called electrostatic direct energy conversion. Under other circumstances, the heat would be used to boil water, which would then turn to steam and turn the generators. But as the engines employ a laser-induced optical slurry for cooling, it was deemed more appropriate and above all more efficient to employ direct energy conversion. The fusion reaction occurs within the massive reactor chamber within a highly charged plasma medium. A selective leakage port on the reactor chamber opens, and by means of magnetics and electrostatics, the ions and electrons in the plasma medium selectively leak from the reactor chamber and are directed into an expansion chamber. Here, the plasma medium, containing the highly charged particles, is guided and expanded in volume by a fan-shaped electromagnetic field that reduces the power density and converts the rotational energy of the reactor chamber to directional energy suitable for conversion. The electrons are separated from the plasma stream and collected on an electron collector grid of varying potentials based on the variance in high and low energy electrons. This forms the negative terminal of the power source. Next, the ions are decelerated by retarding electric fields. Kinetic energy is thereby converted into potential energy, and finally, the decelerated ions are collected on a high voltage electrode that form the positive terminal of the power supply. This method of converting raw nuclear fusion energy to usable electricity can be considered as a particle accelerator in reverse. The high energy particles in the chamber are decelerated to low enough speeds to be effectively and above all efficiently manipulated and converted. The vast majority of the rest of the energy created is directed to thrusters in a process called vector drive exhaust. Hul Section 5 is octagonal in shape and is entirely taken up by the vector drive exhaust conduits and the thrusters of the Autumn. The reactor, actually contained within Hul Section 4, outputs its highly charged plasma medium into the vector drive exhaust conduits. These conduits are highly insulated to heat, radiation and damage, and contain an inner surface of superconducting material, actively cooled in a similar manner to the fusion cores themselves, to remain cool enough to not melt under the intense operating temperature, and to generate a complex topography of overlapping electromagnetic fields and repulsor streams to guide the highly charged plasma medium from the reactor core through their length and into the thruster assemblies. There are a number of thruster units on the Autumn that take power from different aspects of the reactor cores. The 2 larger thrusters are Boglinfield's Starfire 4 fusion rockets. They are powered directly by the reactor core and can be supplemented by the 2 smaller secondary reactors to increase output to 300%. The plasma generated by the reactor cores is channeled into the 2 massive exhaust manifold bundles, totaling 24 individual drive exhaust conduits for the larger primary engines, which vector it to the ship's primary engine nozzles. The drive exhaust serves as reaction mass, providing propulsion for the ship. The 12 smaller thrusters are powered by 6 exhaust manifolds that branch from the reactor cores to the port and starboard of the ship, feeding the plasma generated by the reactor cores through the manifolds and to the smaller thrusters by vector drive exhaust conduits, totaling 12 individual drive exhaust conduits for each of the 12 smaller engines. On both the port and the starboard there are two larger thrusters, also known to be compact auxiliary fusion rockets, which are purposefully larger due to their ability to provide thrust in both the forward and reverse direction. While normally used in tandem with the ship's main thrusters, like the thrust further forward along the hull, these thrusters can produce reverse thrust, assisting the ship in slowing down, coming to a standstill, or even moving in reverse. Due to the weightlessness in space, it takes proportionally very little thrust to move a ship from a standstill into a reverse motion, and any amount of thrust generated in the reverse direction while the ship is moving forward can significantly slow the vessel's forward momentum. For both sets of thrusters, the drive system also includes an exotic mechanism that utilises high-order manifolds to eliminate the otherwise devastating fusion backblast. These can be seen as glowing rings and concentric patterns within the thruster nozzles. They serve to ensure the massive amounts of energy the reactors produce and vector to the thrusters never builds up and backflows back into the reactor core, allowing any excess energy not able to exit the thrusters due to the flow rate to be selectively leaked off via these conductive surfaces. At the very top of the engine cowling is a multi-purpose scan array which contains tactical sensors and an electronic eavesdropping suite. And finally, the very rear component of the Pillar of Autumn is the variable area exhaust nozzles on every single one of its thrusters. These small articulating armatures can alter the area of open exhaust leaving the thrusters, attenuating the thrust as well as allowing a degree of thrust vectoring, baffling, and shaping of the engine exhaust. The Pillar of Autumn, being one of the most recognisable ships in Halo lore and somewhat of an antique, had stood the test of time, and being upgraded to match and arguably in many regards supersede many of the Navy's more modern vessels. She was structurally sound and built like a tank. She had more efficient engines, superior armament, and impressive manoeuvrability for a ship of her size, and played a pivotal role in the closing months of the Human Covenant War. It is for this reason that the Autumn Class Heavy Cruiser, which entered service as a replacement for the Marathon Class after the Covenant War, was designed after the refitted Pillar of Autumn. Due to the instrumental role the Autumn played in the war, the lead ship of the new class was named UNSC Pillar of Autumn II, in honour of the original. She was truly an epic ship, captained and crewed by some of the best the UNSC had to offer. Thanks for watching. Stick your comments down below and I look forward to what you have to say. I want to give another shout out to EckhartsLadder for this collaboration and throwing me a little rope. Again, if you haven't subscribed to him, get over to his channel and show him some love. He makes some awesome stuff. I want to also give a shout out to my patron Miguel Lopez, the holder of the mantle. If you like Halo lore discussed to insane levels of detail, hit the subscribe button and the little bell icon so you're told the second it hits the shelves. If you really love the channel, consider popping over to Patreon and supporting the channel over there. It would mean the world to me and would free up more time for me to put into this Halo content and other Halo related goodness. Take it easy everyone, find peace in the domain.